It's going to provide humanity a path to abundance. That's why I'm in Bitcoin, because I believe that that's what it does.
Hello, and welcome back to the CoinStories podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Brunell, and we are talking to some of the leading voices in Bitcoin, their backstories, how they were first introduced to Bitcoin, and their take on what the cryptocurrency offers. I'm excited to share my guest today is the incredibly kind and smart Jeff Booth. Jeff is an entrepreneur, angel investor, and thought leader on how technology is transforming the world. He's built several successful tech companies and is a best-selling author who wrote The Price of Tomorrow: Why Deflation is the Key to an Abundant Future. Now, in an economic system built on debt and inflation, Jeff sees a framework where we take advantage of the deflation technology inherently offers, and he believes Bitcoin will be a bridge to an abundant future. And that future is one of incredible hope. Here's Jeff. Okay, so super excited to talk to you, Jeff. And I always start at the very beginning. So I saw that you're from Saskatchewan, and then your family moved to Vancouver in British Columbia. So let's take it all the way back. Tell me about where you're from and your upbringing.
Wow, that is the very beginning. Yeah, I'm from Saskatchewan. I say it's a great place to be from, but moved out to BC when we were young, when I was one, and been in BC, been in BC ever since.
So tell me a little bit about just your family life. What did your parents do? What was it like growing up there? I mean, I hear interesting things about Canada, good things, and then some interesting things about the politics.
You know what? Mostly great. So we didn't come from money. My parents at that time, they had me when I was young, or when they were young, 20 and 21. And my brother a year later, and another brother 5 years later. So I think at that time it was hard. They worked hard. We didn't have a lot. We grew up, I'd say, lower middle class. And then my parents got into real estate in '78. And three young kids, or my mom got into real estate first, my dad followed. And then for a time, it was the first time that I actually remember actually thinking, wow, maybe we have money. Because real estate was going crazy, everything else. And then on the other side of that, losing everything. And thinking, so the first time I was ever on a plane was in '81. We went to Disneyland, and it was incredible. And then everything was gone. And so growing up, I felt like I had everything in incredible parents, family life, everything else. But then seeing kind of how money could affect you, positive, negative, and everything else. And on the other side of that too, probably what it taught me, what it taught me at that time, and then I had to unwind some of that, is I will never put my family through that. And so I'm going to work like crazy. I'm going to learn everything possible. And so I have so much money. And then on the very opposite side, money doesn't matter at all. So those two competing forces, I would say, I grew up with in my life. And then so just interesting. But if I said what was my life growing up, it was incredible. All the benefits in the world and everything else, family that loves you, curiosity. So we camped. We did a whole bunch of stuff that didn't take money, and we had a really close family friend group and everything else, and still do today.
Wow. So, I mean, it sounds like when your parents got into real estate, there was a sudden shift. You guys all of a sudden had more money, but how did it all go away? What happened? Was there some sort of crash?
Yeah. So in '78, '79, '80, '81, you had
Hyperinflation. Yeah.
Actually similar to what's happening today, levering up, lots of debt being created, inflation rates going up, and real estate going really well. Everybody was winning, and the more leverage you took, the more you won. And this isn't, people get caught in this. My parents got caught in this, and you lever up thinking it's always going to look like that, And then when interest rates went up to 20% to be able to try to stop inflation, everything gets wiped out. And so a whole bunch of businesses at that time and people that had wealth were wiped out at that point, and us being in that circumstance.
It's so interesting because it reminds you that the globe is so interconnected even at that point. I mean, because you're talking about the move that Volcker made, right? Raising the interest rates in the 80s, but you were in Canada, it impacted everyone.
Exactly. That impact is all around, everywhere around the globe. And same thing today. If the U.S. is the base currency of the world and everyone else is on top of that, the U.S. catches a cold, everybody else catches a fever, right?
Yeah. Well, so when you were young, obviously you were very informed by your parents' situation. So you said you wanted to make a lot of money. You didn't want your family in the future to suffer the way you guys did at some point. So what did you want to be? Because I saw you went into real estate too.
So I went into real estate more of I wanted to get into business and I didn't know how to. So I went to school. I went to UBC for a year or half a year, and I dropped out of university after school just because it was too slow. It just felt like I wanted to move faster, and I went into real estate thinking this is a way into business, and I can learn business, and so typical entrepreneur. Maybe I was always an entrepreneur. I was always an entrepreneur. And so in real estate, you had a choice. You had a choice at that time. Do you go to somebody who teaches you the ropes and you share your commission with kind of a company like Century 21 or something, or do you go to 100% place where you make everything, but you pay a desk fee, you pay everything. And so I went for the 100%, took my real estate license, went and paid a desk fee. I'm living on my own. I have 3 months to be able to make it. I'm 19, 20 years old, and I don't know the first thing about real estate. I don't know how what to do. So I open up the phone book day one. I have a phone on my desk that I've rented. That's it. And I open up the phone book and I start calling people. But you don't know when you open up a phone book if somebody owns real estate or they don't own real estate. So I made tens of thousands of calls doing that and just kind of learning and it is probably a great way. A lot of entrepreneurs try something and outwork, and they'll do anything to try to drive success. And so my motivation was here. My knowledge was somewhere on the ground. and so as your knowledge gains, and if you could keep the motivation, you can do really well. And I did extraordinarily well at real estate.
So it worked. The phone book worked.
You have a phone book where that didn't work so well, but you learn, again, you error correct, you learn what works and everything else. I did extraordinarily well at real estate, ended up buying a real estate company, and then started a building company from there, and then started a technology company from there. So.
Well, I want to ask you about some of those, but first, I mean, why did you want to put that pressure on yourself of starting a business as opposed to finishing school? I mean, you hear these stories of people dropping out and they're not getting what they want out of education and they just go off on their own, but why did you make that decision?
I don't know. I just thought school was too slow. Like I couldn't see myself. I couldn't see anything that I was going to school for mattering in my life. I felt I could learn it on my own faster. Is really, if I'm honest on that. And it wasn't that school wasn't fun, but it wasn't driving my curiosity. It wasn't driving anything. And so I got to a point that okay, I could take this path and then what? Or I could just start now.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And it's a good takeaway for today, I think, for a lot of people, especially people who haven't been in a real class setting for over a year.
Well, this is connected to education right now is free.
Yeah.
It's completely free. It's the certification isn't free, but you can learn anything about any subject from anybody around. You can get the best education right now for free. So if you're curious and driven, it's completely free already.
So tell me about your first really big company, because I read that you kind of saw some issues or some needs that weren't being met by the real estate industry, and you saw a gap that you could kind of fill. So tell me a little bit about that. I think there's a story even of you had a client who had to move into a hotel room for a bit because they didn't have their construction done. I mean, what did you see that needed fixing?
Okay, you have done some research on me.
A little bit.
so so one of the so I was selling real estate, and then and this is before the building company, and then and I had already bought a house in one of the nicest subdivisions in Vancouver, really nice subdivision, and a great school district. But I didn't have kids. I was living. It was like a frat house with a whole bunch of friends, and then one of my clients couldn't afford that subdivision. It was too expensive for them, and there was nothing available. And they had 3 young kids that wanted to get into that school, and so I came home from a meeting with those clients, and I said to my friends, I said, we're selling the house, and I sold the house to that couple for, at that time, I think it was 220,000, and the value of it was 250,000. So I sold it for 30,000 under market so that they could get into that subdivision for their kids. And I called up a friend of mine, a different friend of mine, and I said, "Could you teach me how to build? Could you teach? So we'll buy a double lot, and you could teach me how to build, and I'll pay you to help build my house, and then on the other lot we'll build another house, and hopefully I can pay back the fee I'm paying to you through the other house." So that started my building company. And I wouldn't have started the building company had I not sold the house to these people for under market. So it was just a door that opened. and then the other house, when the other house wasn't selling, and I thought we were going to lose everything on the other house. And then when it sold, somebody else came to us and said, "Hey, could you build us the exact same house?" And all of a sudden, I had a building company. And then the building company took off, and we were building lots of houses. And then from that experience, one of the houses that I was building, I had to put the people in a hotel, furniture and storage, because I couldn't deliver the house on time because the supply chain was so bad. And I was frustrated. So I didn't want to start a technology company that was solving building supplies. I was frustrated because I couldn't do the job that I said I would do. And so then I looked to technology to solve that. And that's where I created probably the first really big company, my first big technology success story. And that was Build Direct. And it grew to over $500 million in market cap through that. But it was really, it grew from a frustration of a market structure that didn't work to I have to solve this, and then using technology to be able to solve that.
That's amazing. I mean, you so modest, right? You're like just a $500 million market cap.
It's easy to be modest if you were in my seat, and again, starting that company and thinking what I knew versus what I knew. And it's easy to be modest if you've gone through every war story and everything else, and the changes in yourself that you have to do to be able to create a company, and seeing all of the different events, turning events, moments that could have killed it, and everything else. So it's really easy to be modest.
Tell me a little bit about what that company did. And I'm curious about these war stories, because the thing that I'm finding fascinating about you is I relate in the sense that you saw your parents struggle and you wanted to make sure no matter what, your future family doesn't go through that. And so I think that gives you that momentum, that drive, that passion to do whatever it takes to survive, to hustle, and to make it. But I think for a lot of people, it also sends them down a very traditional path. The 9-to-5 job, the safe paycheck, the 401k, the retirement plan, just something that feels safe because you're so scared of losing everything. So for you, I feel like it made you more of a risk taker, which is amazing and what you need to be in business. So can you talk a little bit about both just what that company was and what it taught you through those war stories you mentioned?
Yeah. So first a clarification on that. What I thought was, I'm going to do all of this for money and everything else. And what I realized is my parents gave me everything that I had, everything I needed all along. I didn't need any money. Yeah, I didn't. And so the most important lesson was that what I took out of it was probably the wrong lesson. That, but it drove a curiosity and a learning and everything else. And then the real lesson was more important. Um, so the business itself essentially said, we're going to use technology to take a supply chain that's completely fragmented, and people only see a very small amount of the choice that's out there because of that fragmented supply chain. So Home Depot says, I'm going to buy this, and they have to say no to about a million other things to be able to put the thing on the shelf that they say yes to. And that results in a, they can't go wrong. Everything they choose sells, but you only see what they choose. It looks a lot like what music used to look like before iTunes, or Spotify. And and that feeds back on itself, and that system feeds back on itself. So a whole bunch of people can't get access to that system. And that system causes a whole bunch of supply chain disruptions. And so and you could see it if you were in building, what it did to timelines and everybody, and what happened, not through fault of people, but through fault of a system. So BuildDirect was built to be able to solve that. That's what that. If you say what are some of the lessons, probably the most critical lessons were things that I thought I knew, things that I was stopping the success. But I thought it was a market force stopping the success, but it was me. Some of the most important lessons to the success were actually the ones that were that I couldn't see myself stopping. When you start an idea like that, you don't know, and you hire a team and everything else, and then you have a ton of success, and then the same thing that made you successful prevents you from the next part of the success. And why? Here's one reason. Because to go against the grain, a whole bunch of people think you're insane. Mm-hmm. And then if you're right, and everybody tells you you're right, then and everybody comes to you, and it reinforces. Your ego gets away on you, and you think you're smarter than everybody else. And so you lean in and you think you're smart. And if that happens, you can't enable your team to get to the next level. So I have this saying that the more power or influence you have, your humility has to go up faster, or it's completely unstable. But you see that actually. So I would say that's been an important lesson in life, not just in business, but that would be an important lesson in everything.
I love that. I think that's a good lesson for a lot of leaders that we have today. Is that company how you sort of ventured into just technology and starting to realize that there was a massive shift that was happening with society?
I guess in my book and everything else from the book came out of a relationship, being around some of the top technology companies as the top technology companies were just starting. So if you think about the time I started my business in 99 and what it took to go through the dot-com collapse and everything else, and the people I knew as a result of all of these technology companies, and I'm in the boardrooms, I'm with all of these people, I'm spending time with all the top technology companies on a regular basis, conferences and everything else. And I could not, and I kept talking about it, I could not understand why, if technology was bringing prices down at this rate, why we weren't seeing that prices come down in the world. And so I was just curious. Funny enough, that when you think about the thing that drove me to my book is actually the same thing that drove me to any business. It's looking at a system that doesn't work and saying, this system doesn't work, I need to fix this system. And then the energy goes into fixing the system. I would just say that all the book was a derivative of a bigger system that didn't work, and understanding that it can't work, and so I need to do something about it.
Just for people who haven't read The Price of Tomorrow, and obviously you focus a lot on deflation and how technology brings that about, and it's changing the way that we live. But for people that haven't read your book, can you kind of summarize it from your own words and what people might get out of it, especially given the economic shift that we're seeing after the pandemic?
So we live in one system. In that system, it's built on a believable lie. And it's built on a believable lie that our money must be worth less every year so we can live a good life. And if you think about that, so inflation, that's all it is, your money being worth less each life. Why does that lie exist? Because it doesn't seem to pass the smell test, but people believe it. But it goes counter to what we actually are rational decisions. We all make decisions for ourselves on the best value combination we can. So in our own lives, we look for prices coming down and abundance going up. Yet we believe in a system that should work the exact opposite. So it doesn't. So what's happening today is technology frees our time. It same in a business. People, a CEO, myself, I put in technology into business to make people's lives better, to try to free their time. And if you're right, then people use your business and your business expands. If you're wrong, your business goes broke. And so you create businesses to help other people by using technology to save their time or give them more for less. So it stands to reason that if the world is moving more and more onto technology enabled rails, that's where then we should be getting more and more for less all the time. It should just keep on falling more, and that an abundance with less money, in other words, freeing our time. But we have two different systems colliding against each other. The system we used to live in, which is we need more jobs, we need more growth, we need more everything else. And what's happening is money is being manipulated to make that true. So it's not true, it's just money is being manipulated to make it true. So one system has to push prices up while the other system is bringing down prices the other way. And if you look through the lens of that those systems are feeding back faster and faster against each other. They're moving in opposing directions faster and faster as a result. So why $570 billion in 2008, there were marches on Wall Street. And when there's now fives and tens of trillions of dollars, there's no marches. Is because of that system. You're having these two systems collide against each other, and technology is going to win. But the byproduct of the other system, the existing system fighting against that technology, is destroying society.
Can you talk a little bit about how Bitcoin plays into this? Because I was trying to find out where you even discovered Bitcoin, and I didn't see that anywhere. So like, at what point did you discover Bitcoin and think, oh, this has some legs?
So probably early, but I wish I took it more seriously. But because I was in the technology industry, some of my technical team were into Bitcoin. They were talking about it and everything else, but I was too busy building business to take it very seriously. So I probably didn't take it seriously until 2017, and even then just started dabbling, but learning more. Even in my book, it's a paragraph. But because I didn't want it to be about Bitcoin. I wanted it to be about what type of system is required, and then out of the requirements of a new system, what is the best chance to anchor that new system? So that's what I see at Bitcoin. So and again, in what you'll hear today around the globe is you're going to hear, if you have corruption in base money, if you have essentially a theft, inflation is a theft on the middle class and poor. So if you have corruption in base money, then as a byproduct, you must have corruption everywhere else in society. So if you have misinformation that in base money, then it's likely you're going to have misinformation everywhere else. And what most people are caught in is that infinite loop of more and more misinformation. And that moves into conspiracy theories about everything. And by the way, logically so, because if somebody is just like, if we trusted each other and then I knew you were lying to me, I wouldn't trust you on anything else, right? So if people find out that a system is based on corruption, and more lies spread from that, then you're going to create a whole bunch of misinformation in society. So that's actually what's happening today in society, but it's a system problem. And I often ask, what could governments do right now? What could the US government do right now to reset this problem from the system? And I wish I could say anything. They can't do anything. This system is going to get worse and worse and worse, because if they allowed deflation to happen, then it would look like the Great Depression on steroids. Every single bank would collapse. Every institution would collapse. Governments themselves would collapse if they allowed deflation to happen, because you have a credit-based system that requires more and more growth. And if you allow kind of nature to take its course, a free market to take its course, you have a collapse that keeps on getting worse and worse and worse, all the way down. And so people can't even face the truth that what I'm talking about, that technology provides abundance, because they're worried about getting to the other side. Right? Because first, to get that to the other side, you have to go through this winter and it might be 10 years of chaos and everything else to get to the other side. So what do people do? They put their head in the sand and they make the system worse. And as they make the system worse, you remember, a whole bunch of people are losing out. So middle class, poor, they're working harder and harder and they can't keep up, and they can't pay their food, and they can't pay. Now the rents went up higher and they can't pay that. And all those prices are going higher because the system is making them go higher. So what would those people do? Naturally, and what would you do if you were them? I know you're in LA and you look at the homeless and everything else, and you see and you see what's happening, how fast it's happening. What would those people do? Who would they vote for? They're going to vote for somebody who says, I'm going to give you some money. And without asking, where does the money come from? And the money comes from picking your pocket faster. So, but you can see why the system is actually, it's incapable of solving itself. So for me, Bitcoin, what I realized is out of these two systems competing against each other, no system ever changes itself. It's imposed by the outside. And so now what type of system, system could produce a benefit for society at large as a result of a transition path? And that's where I came to Bitcoin. So similar to, and you know this because I use the example in my book, but Blockbuster is a system, right? Yeah. 9,000 stores, and they even though they see Netflix, they can't solve Netflix because the value comes from a different spot. And so what do? They add candy aisles to their stores, but that's a pretty predictable response. And same as Kodak. Even though they invented the digital camera, pretty predictable response. And we have billions of trillions of photos today for no cost, but it's a different design of a system. And so right now, what's happening in the world is that type of change is coming from monetary policy. That type of change is coming to all of the systems we've grown up and trusted in that are going to break down because of Bitcoin. And you can question this, but this is where I get to. Technology is deflationary, period. Technology produces efficiency, and that efficiency creates deflation. And I'd have anybody in the world try to argue me on that point, but that's what happens. It creates information, becomes free, and more things are becoming information. So that's what happens.
The hard drive goes from 3,000 to $1.
Exactly. Or my music CD that I bought for $19.95 for lots of every CD, and now I have unlimited for $9.95 a month. Yep. And that doesn't show up in a GDP calculation. The photos you take on your phone don't show up on a GDP calculation because it's not things anymore. That whole structure went away, and that's just starting. Most of it's still to come. That technology creates deflation, and it creates less jobs. And that's a good thing because our time goes up as it creates less jobs. If we wanted to, we could dig big holes with spoons. We don't because we're trying to save our time with technology. And so the point is, it creates less jobs over time, and more and more so. So that's that path requires a digitally native currency that allows for deflation. And every other path that stops that is a concentration of power. So if you try to drive inflation against that path, then you only do so by concentrating power. Essentially, I'm doing it to help these other people that I'm actually hurting as a byproduct of my actions. That's what that's what you're doing. And on that path, by doing that, it actually resets in three pretty predictable ways: revolution, war, absolute control by central state, like a central power like China, where you have absolute control of monetary sovereignty, and anybody could be taken out of that system in an instant. But you're putting your faith in humans who can make different decisions later under a totalitarian type of control. Those anything against the natural order of things moves in that direction. And so the 1 and 2, kind of revolution, war, totalitarian states, that is the path we're on the existing system right now. And it will likely get worse and worse and worse on that existing system. And my hope on Bitcoin is this, because it's exactly the opposite system. It's exactly the opposite. It is a free market system. It is exactly the opposite system. But if enough people can transition in time, you have a softer landing through the mess that's going to come. And so that's my hope, and that's why I try to stay away from toxicity on Bitcoin as well, because I desperately want more people on the new system, so that they have more control in their future.
Right. Well, I want to dig deeper into something that you touched on, because anyone can see the division that's been sown into society, and people do acknowledge that there is corruption. I think I've never in my lifetime seen more people really angry and feeling like they're getting screwed, and that politicians have something to do with it, regardless of if they're on the left or the right. But they're not making that connection because we have such a poor financial education, I think, in general. Whether you're in Canada or the US, you don't learn about how this system works, the fractional reserve banking. You don't learn about how credit is issued, how money is really printed. And so I think that's part of the hurdle with Bitcoin, is people don't understand the fundamental economics for them to make that connection and say, oh, wow, Bitcoin is a potential solution that offers me hope. So how do we get there?
I think that's actually why my books struck such a nerve and is still a bestseller around the world. And I'm asked to be able to, because it simplifies concepts that are too hard to understand. When a government says quantitative easing and they have the control of the airwaves, nobody connects that to what it actually means. When we hear inflation, we don't actually connect it. If governments weren't allowed to use inflation, if they had to say, we're doing everything possible to make your money worth less next year, you might think differently about inflation.
Right.
But and so as you make up new names sounding to protect a fractional reserve system, because you must, it confuses people more and more. And so the best people to explain things simplify really, really complex topics into simple things people can understand. It means you understand it well enough. You should be able to, if you want to debate a system, you should know the system, how it's going to, down to the sand on the system, and then you should know where it's going, and then you should be able to abstract up to a layer to be able to communicate that change. And so that's why I hanging on technology, because we see all around us technology is creating this efficiency, and it begs the question, why aren't things getting cheaper? And once you ask that question, you start to look deeper and deeper and deeper. And so how do we do this? Here it was an interesting thing. The Bitcoin and everything that people are talking about in Bitcoin, it is the truth. I believe that the more the system has to be able to, I hate using these words, but the more the system has to deceive to stay relevant, more people see the truth. So it actually works to actually accelerate Bitcoin's adoption, but it also works to this, because these, remember I said the systems are moving in opposite directions faster and faster. It also more and more people are confused, and hopefully, if Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is confusing too to a lot of people who haven't gone down, and if somebody says have fun staying poor, I get it. I get why that toxicity in Bitcoin, and a lot of those people are my friends too.
Yeah.
But if people say that, then a lot of people will put up a wall.
Yeah.
And not dig deeper on why it's so important. And again, we live in a free market, or hopefully we live in a free market. We don't right now, but in when we get to the other side on Bitcoin, we can. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion. But in some of those things, I'm just saying the reason I try to stay neutral on this is because I understand if you're somebody that has no idea about what the financial market looks like, and you can't pay your bills, and you can't pay food for your family, and the government says, don't worry, it's not your fault, it's those people's fault over there, and we're going to print more money to help you.
Right.
What would you believe? A whole bunch of Bitcoiners or that?
Exactly.
Right.
Well, so I want to ask you, because I think people are used to that sense of these business cycles, the booms and the busts. Like, we've just sort of accepted it, right? And sometimes they're worse, sometimes they're not as bad. But there are some macro strategists who are predicting a massive deflationary bust, that we won't be able to just kick the can down the road. We're on the precipice of this cliff, and we're going to need to see all of it unravel. There will be bankruptcies, potentially currencies will fail. What do you think about that? Especially, with what the pandemic kind of threw in our face. Do you think we're going to see that?
So we live in an overall macro deflationary environment that governments are trying to print their way out of. And at some sort of printing, they could be successful. And so, but that printing at some point loses all control of currency. Now you have people thinking that we're moving into hyperinflation right now, and I'll take the under. That is not going to happen, and why isn't it going to happen? So governments are trying to make prices go up, and what does business need to do to remain viable? They need to put technology into the business faster. So as a result, and unless labor has a way to get way higher wages, and short term they can, but long term they can't, because these are all being technology enabled, then the printing eventually kind of falls on itself. So that's where governments are trapped right now, and central banks are trapped. They're stuck in this cycle, making it worse and worse all the time. And on the opposing side of the cycle, it's moving faster too. So they're moving faster, and it's moving faster over here. But when you have US dollar responsible for essentially the base layer of money all around the world, it's not going to end tomorrow. It's not going to, other currencies will end way before the US. And what they will get away with it, because right now a lot of people are saying you're going to move into hyperinflation. And I would say, including in the Bitcoin community, people believe that. And I don't believe that at all. What the challenge is of doing that system isn't hyperinflation, because what you can imagine, and I use this example on Pomp's show too, but lumber prices 3 times higher, house prices, call it 50% higher, 46% higher, all of these prices higher. What happens as you start to lower the amount of stimulus? You already see it in lumber right now. It's falling in price. So now what people are using as an inflation gauge over the last quarter had lumber prices going up by 3 times, and now it's coming down. It adds to the deflation rate. So then, if you ask what the question will look like over what the central bankers do, if everybody's talking about inflation, what the central bankers will say is, "See, told you, we don't have inflation. It's just transitory, and we need to do more." The problem is the more is dividing society more. The more is centralizing control, and it's removing the free market forces. So the problem isn't an inflation rate that's going to go into hyperinflation, at least in the US. The problem is the concentration of control in government. And that becomes the risk, because when government makes all the decisions, then your economy has to suffer because the free market isn't making the decisions, and long-term prosperity goes down.
I think that's really interesting what you said, because the most convincing argument that I've seen when it comes to we will see hyperinflation is that essentially the government has to taper at some point, because we're rolling out of control. And so when they do, that will crash everything. And then the response will be more printing and adding to that. And at that point, it will run away. And so that does make me question, like, where are we going? But you're right. On the other side, there is that deflation happening. So, I mean, but for the average person, this is all so hard to sort out, right? Most people just want to go to their job. They want to provide for their family. They want to have a normal life and not be bothered by anyone and be able to make some free choices. So, and that kind of goes back to just Bitcoin and what Bitcoin offers. I mean, talk to me about where you see things going in the next 5 years, because when you wrote your book, you couldn't have predicted the pandemic. So, how has your mind shifted over just in the near term? Like, let's say next 5 years, how do you see the economy on a global scale playing out? And how do you see Bitcoin sort of gaining, more awareness and attention and adoption?
Yeah. So at some point, I don't think in this cycle, Bitcoin will reach hyper Bitcoinization, but probably the next cycle. And my hope is it doesn't this cycle, because it allows more people to onboard. So, but at some point, I think it's almost a certainty at this point. I don't actually see another possibility out of this. So let's go down some of those paths. So if the government tapered and allowed everything to collapse, and that was around the world, what do you think would happen?
I think everyone would run to the dollar first, but over the long term, over the next 10 years, the US dollar with inflation could actually be removed from its place as the global reserve currency, because there's just going to be too much.
So that'll happen for sure too. But what would happen is, if everything started failing, there would be an outcry from the populace all over the world for the government to do something. In other words, it would gain more control, maybe potentially on central bank digital currency.
For sure.
So there's a whole bunch of things that are still to come in Bitcoin, up and down on the way, on game theory, essentially on the existing system and on the other system. But Bitcoin will, I think it'll survive all of those things and thrive, and more people will come on. People are talking in Bitcoin today, they're really investing in TCP/IP, right? The protocol layer of the internet, and then layer 2, Lightning and such, and everything else that's coming on top of that is going to provide a wholly different structure for finance going forward, and it's going to stop money from being able to be manipulated. That's what I expect, and it's going to provide humanity a path to abundance. That's why I'm in Bitcoin, because I believe that that's what it does. I think it provides a path to technology abundance by not allowing manipulated money. Essentially, abundance in money creates scarcity everywhere else. Scarcity in money creates abundance everywhere else. So more and more people are starting to understand that. And you saw it in Miami. I could not believe, like, it touched me, that many people, that it was just pure love. Like, it was such a awesome group of people and everything else. And what I realized is, maybe this is what humanity looks like when you don't try to make everybody race to create more and more and more out of manipulating money. Maybe people actually care like this about other people and everything else, and it looks like this, and we see the best in humanity when we're not manipulating humanity. So that's what it left. That's the impression that Miami gave to me. And I hope for my kids, I hope for that it looks more like that.
Yeah, I love that. I concur with everything you said about that. But I do want to talk about some of the FUD that's just happening. And it's maybe not so much in the Bitcoin community, except for maybe newbies. But just in general, we saw the price drop. I mean, 40%. Bitcoin is so expensive. I mean, it feels out of reach for so many people to own just one, even at the fallen price. And so many people have asked me, and I see it on Twitter, just what is actually driving the price? Was it Elon Musk's tweet? Is it the China mining? Is something being manipulated because institutions finally want in and they want to go in cheaper? Can you talk about just what your analysis of the price is right now and how we get back to being on that momentum of the highs? Because right now we're teetering on the edge of possibly not following the stock to flow model.
Yeah, I still think it'll follow the stock to flow model. I might be wrong, but what are some of the big drivers of that? Um, because a lot of people think Bitcoin can be manipulated, and it can't be. It is the free market. Now, I would say that every single thing is manipulated, and as a result, if you're destroying if you're printing base money at the rate that we're printing money, then every single economic calculation, including Bitcoin, is responding on top of that. And so people don't realize this. They think their houses always go up in price without asking. In the last 20 years, we've made up $185 trillion of new money. Now, would your house go up over the last 20 years if $185 trillion of new money wasn't created? And the
Right.
answer is pretty simply no. You would see what's been there all along. So that manipulation has far more important implications to every economic calculation that we deal with, but we don't notice it because it's done behind the scenes. So what are some of the bigger drivers right now on Bitcoin? China mining, and and hash rate going down because China banning Bitcoin. And that should be the best thing. That should be the number one signal people should be getting on Bitcoin as fast as they can, because it sends a signal of what just happened. Preston said to me the other day, he said, "You've been saying this for a long time. It took China a lot longer to ban it than you said." And I said, "Yeah, you have to expect that China has to ban Bitcoin because it doesn't work with a communist society.
Yeah.
It's actually it can't work because it defunds communism. It takes power away from government, and government gains its power by printing money. So government has to get smaller and listen to its people, and that is a totally different thought process for China than typically on the West. Um, so I expected that to happen, but then hash rate going down and before the difficulty adjustment means a whole bunch of the miners are losing money. And not just the money that they're now not making on Bitcoin because hash rates are going down, but also all of their hardware, infrastructure, everything else, that they have to sell a whole bunch of their Bitcoin to be able to try to pay this back and try to move production and everything else. And that flood of the market has happened at the same time Elon Musk came on and talked about Bitcoin,
Mm-hmm.
which was likely driven by Blackstone giving him a tap and saying we're going to sell down your stock unless you walk back your comments. I can't say that for sure, but all of this stuff is just noise and the greater theme of what's happening. I think about them as buying opportunities of Bitcoin in what's happening. Nothing has changed my fundamental thesis on Bitcoin. In fact, it's way stronger now than it ever has been.
Oh, yeah, I would expect that. I mean, I mentioned before this interview that I was watching one of your interviews right before the pandemic. I mean, literally, it was recorded like March 6th, a week before shutdowns. And your convictions on just the Ponzi scheme of debt were very, very strong. And we didn't even have the pandemic yet, which I think it's just crystallizing the use of Bitcoin, the importance of Bitcoin. I mean, if you could go back now knowing that the pandemic was going to hit, would you change anything in your book or add anything to it?
Uh, I don't know. I I purposely didn't make Bitcoin a feature of the book because you know when you have to explore for yourself, you have to ask yourself a question. You have to see,
Yeah.
okay, your brain has to connect the dots and say, okay, how could this work? And unless you can ask the question, then you can't get to the other side. By the way, it's the same thing right now for a whole bunch of people outside of Bitcoin. If you're living in a system that has a whole bunch of negative externalities, and a new system doesn't promise hope to what it looks like. And by the way, Bitcoin right now, I don't think we've come together on what it could look like for humanity on the other side. So that people don't want to leave a system and go to another one that looks worse.
Right.
There needs to be a from to, and there needs to be, and really great businesses create what this looks like in the future. This is why we're doing it. And I think a lot of work should go into there on Bitcoin. I might spend some more time on a paper on what it looks like on the other side, what this turns into, because that connection would allow more people to see, I get it. I get what this does. So my book talked about what this does, and then left open the question, what could it look like, so people could start to draw their own conclusions, but it didn't fill the gap on what ends up happening out of a system that's actually congruent with innovation, human nature, that the incentives of the system are aligned to people. It didn't do that. It didn't finish that job. And so I think that's a bunch of work that needs to happen in Bitcoin.
So, are you very convinced that mass adoption will happen regardless of governments or politicians that are obviously greedy and want to maintain the power that they have, the central banks that want to maintain in power? Because a lot of people, I think, might ask, well, couldn't what happened in China happen in the US? We already see very prominent politicians tweeting saying, hey, we need to take the reins over Bitcoin and crypto because it's destroying the climate, or, it's for nefarious activity. I mean, what's the biggest threat to Bitcoin?
The biggest threat isn't anything that anybody's talking about right now. That is no threat. In fact, that'll make it go faster. If a government comes out and says why they should stop Bitcoin, you should take that as a message and buy it as fast as you can, because they're sending a message that says, we need to control you at all costs. We're essentially, what Bitcoin is try and think about this. Try to stop a technology that it is a technology that empowers individual rights and freedoms. When in the history has a technology that does that ever been stopped? That's what governments are up against when they're trying to stop this, because you have on one side you have technology that is empowering individual rights and freedoms, and on the other side you have misinformation trying to stop that. And what has to happen by the systems is the misinformation has to grow. And as the misinformation grows, more and more people are finding out the truth and onboarding to Bitcoin, making the misinformation have to grow more. So I think it's unstoppable. If I said there was one very small risk, but I'd have to, as a technology person, I'd have to say that it would be quantum at some point. And it wouldn't be quantum on Bitcoin today on quantum breaking a 10-minute in between it would be quantum potentially getting the early Bitcoin before the hashing at some point, and then that being just another area for FUD that it was broken to be able to drive the price. Even that though, there'd be quantum encryption on Bitcoin kind of before that happened. But I'm talking not long-term changing Bitcoin. I'm talking short-term price action on Bitcoin.
The other night I was at a restaurant in Santa Monica, and somehow I got on the topic of crypto with my waitress. And it was really interesting because she's like, oh yeah, I'm an investor. And I go, oh, so you have Bitcoin? And she goes, no, I don't have Bitcoin. And she named off a couple of altcoins. And I go, well, why don't you have Bitcoin? And she said, I mean, the return, it's too expensive. Like I could make so much more if one of these takes off. It's like a penny. If I can actually make really great returns. And I have been thinking about it a lot ever since, because, with what we've seen with like AMC and GameStop and the meme stocks this year, and, people just desperate for that get rich quick sort of situation when they don't really understand the underlying technology. They haven't studied Bitcoin. I think that is part of the hurdle, right? So if you could speak to those people out there that are trading and they're hoping Dogecoin takes off, or, something that's worth a couple pennies goes to $5 or becomes the next Bitcoin. What's your message to them?
Um, get out of all altcoins. But I actually understand why people do that, because in a system that is hurting people, and there's a whole bunch of people that are victims of that system. What could you expect? You could expect more gambling. You could expect more people trying to outrun that system by taking higher and higher bets. And then when they see somebody else hit a huge win off something that was a speculative bet that has no underlying, then more people want to race in.
Yep.
And so when I think of all the altcoins, that's actually what I think about, the entire system. But I do understand why people do it. And for me, I'm in Bitcoin for a way bigger reason than money. Not that it won't make a whole bunch of money, but I'm in for my kids. I'm in for something that's way bigger than the money. So that's actually why I'm Bitcoin only. But I do understand why people would do that. It's just it's the same connection. When a system is breaking down, people will do anything to try to make money.
Right, even gamble.
Yeah, but carry that forward into places like El Salvador or places around the world where we look at them and we say, okay, these are high crime areas. Crime is a second order derivative of not being able to pay your bills.
Right.
And so people turn to crime because look at what's happening in the US right now. Mm-hmm. Look at how fast crime is rising.
Right.
And it's the same thing. If you project going forward what's going to happen, it's going to get a whole bunch worse. And it's a derivative of people not being able to pay their bills, not the other way around. So people put it in the wrong order. Human beings don't naturally go there if given a choice. Our financial system all over the world is forcing people into that spot and forcing people to gamble on these other things as a result too. And so that's more why I care about Bitcoin, because it fixes that.
Exactly. Well, to start to wrap up, just kind of curious, I know you mentioned you might be writing an essay or maybe a second book about this, but let's look into the future. People start to adopt Bitcoin. How does this sort of crony capitalism that I think you've referred to unravel and change, and we improve? We have sound money again, because people look into the future and we see a lot of things. I think I forgot who tweeted something about how I think it was the president of El Salvador. He said when he looked into the future when he was young, he saw flying cars. He didn't see just mass chaos and people fighting and poverty. I mean, he saw hope, and that's what Bitcoin brings. But today, people see artificial intelligence, they see universal basic income, they see infighting, they see hope with Bitcoin. I mean, what do you see?
Yeah, so I technology, where it's going with artificial intelligence, with robotics, with everything else, that could either be all controlled by a very few people, or it could be the power of all that technology could be distributed to everybody in time savings. And I see Bitcoin being the path to be able to do that. It's a really hopeful world on a Bitcoin standard. It's a really hopeful world. In fact, it's the only way to transition from where we were on a system with everything was things to where we're moving on to more information. But it's very hopeful. We don't. I use the education example. Things will drop to free. Prices will drop to free or nearly free on everything. It'll just keep going. And as labor is removed, you'll have more time. I don't know where that time goes, but it doesn't need to go into a job just to pay for prices that were unnaturally put up and made up in the first place. It should go into your time. And so that it is a very hopeful path. It's more hopeful for governments and individuals who are earlier into Bitcoin than later. But it's and that sets up into the game theory of Bitcoin itself. But it's a very hopeful path on Bitcoin.
Bitcoin, we shouldn't be focused on the price, right? But so many people just want to know, when is it going to go back up? What do you think it will take to get us back up to even just the levels that we were at earlier this year, where we're back in the 50s and 60s? Will it need to be some big announcement from institutions? Are we vulnerable to more tweets from Elon Musk or something? What's it going to take to get back to that level of momentum that seems to make Bitcoin Twitter so happy?
I tweeted this the other day and it blew up. But you can't have the biggest asymmetric bet of all time without most people misunderstanding it. So the reason that it's at this price, you should be celebrating it all day long, because it's actually the reason that gives you the opportunity to buy at this price, because so many people misunderstand it. Now, one of two things: we could all be wrong and we're just crazy, or it's the biggest asymmetric bet of all time. But being early on a big asymmetric bet like this ensures most people don't understand it. It ensures people like Elon Musk will tweet. It ensures government will do all this thing. So all of this is part of the noise that makes it stronger and gives you your opportunity right now. I personally think this is still going to go up, way up this year. And it could start as early as hashing starts to be redistributed around the world. And it could start as early as July into this, and we might see an epic run. But I could care less, truly, if that actually happens right now, because it's going to happen at some point.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Coin Stories. I'd love to connect with you if you have questions or guest requests, so feel free to get in touch on Twitter @NatBrunell or Instagram @Natalie Brunell. Take care till next time.